The town of Poughkeepsie is really kind of a small kind of town. It's not really like the city. We don't get that kind of stuff around here, so it's a little shocking.
Police have investigated the disappearance for years, but the house on Vassar Road was always filled with various items. Neighbors described the now deceased Nichols as an intense hoarder, a detail confirmed by police, who say the home was filled with debris and garbage.
In 2013, a contractor was hired and called to this home within an estate for renovation. The owner of this home had just died, and the new buyers or owners wanted to move in. This group of workers set out to work, cleaning the house of old personal items, debris, and various garbage on site. They went to the basement of this house to continue with their work, and they noticed that this particular basement had a false wall. They proceeded to pull down and look into this false wall, and they noticed there was a big and straight plastic bin trapped behind this wall. On opening the plastic bin, they saw it was covered with a plastic bag, and opening the plastic bag, they saw an object was wrapped with several layers of sheets. When they finally started to uncover these various layers of sheets, they made a very chilling discovery. But before I do get into this story, you might consider subscribing to our channel for more disturbing, dark and spooky contents like this. And with that said, let's get into today's story. Located in the deep south and south central regions of the United States is a state known as Louisiana. Joan Miller grew up as a little child on her family's Louisiana's farm Sunny Slope in a big white house with a wraparound porch and several hundred acres of peach, pear orchards, and blackberry bushes. Joan loved children a lot and wanted to devote her life to teaching, hence the reason she obtained her master's in education. While Joan was in graduate school in a Mississippi town called Rolling Fork, she met a man known as James Nichols, who was a doctor's son from Mississippi and was teaching at the university, and they would later go on to marry. On the 1st of June 1956, they gave birth to their child, a son by the name of James Nichols III. In 1963, James would later get hired by another company known as IBM, where he sold insurance, and this company would relocate them from Mississippi to another town known as Poughkeepsie, where they would eventually settle in together with their 2 golden retrievers. The town of Poughkeepsie surrounds the city of Poughkeepsie, which is a southeastern industrial city in the Hudson River Valley, which was about 70 miles north of New York City. Over the years, James was still working for IBM, while a 55-year-old Joan had a job as a first grade teacher. She taught first grade in Vassar Road Elementary School in Poughkeepsie and was later transferred to Gayhead Elementary School in Hopewell Junction, which is also located in New York. She had a natural love for teaching and loved her young students, and in return, her students absolutely loved and adored her as a teacher. She knew how to make every student in her class feel special and involved. She was described as being such a beloved teacher who would do things like rolling out red carpet for our students on the first day of school and bringing cupcakes for their birthdays. Her fellow teachers would go on to say that she was the kind of person who would go an extra mile for her students, and even students who she didn't teach would speak of how nice and kind she was as a person. A friend of the Nichols family, who was a 71-year-old Jenny Foster, during the short-lived Baptist church, would say that the strongest drink she ever had was probably iced tea. Each Sunday, she called her mother, and each summer, she returned home and was always keeping in touch with her loved ones. She also tried to bring some of this warmth she was known for to her new home in the town of Poughkeepsie. And this was regardless of the fact that in May 1982, the only child, James Nichols III, also referred to as Tika, died from drowning at the age of 25. Their son had died in Sardis Lake in Mississippi after falling off the hood of an amphicar which the family owned. An amphicar, also known as an amphibious automobile, is a floating car that can run both on land and in water. After the death of their son and only child, Joanna was hit with so much grief of his son because she loved him a lot. However, just before the eve of Christmas, which was on the morning of December 21st, 1985, which was 3 years after the death of their son, Joan had a hair appointment at a beauty parlor, but didn't show up. When the beauty salon didn't see her, they reached out to her home that afternoon to know if she was around, and when she wasn't found, a missing person report would be made by James, her husband. Over the following days, the police would come to their home to answer to the report and run a check. The police would question James on his wife's sudden disappearance, and they would tell them that they had gone for a dinner the previous night before the appointment day with another couple at a restaurant. While they were in a restaurant, they decided to call it a day and return to their home after a brief argument on that dinner outing. And at the time he last saw her was that morning before he returned to buy dog food, only to find a typed note had possibly been left by her on their home computer. And on the note was Joan detailing the depression she had been passing through since the death of their son. The next day, James would discover her wife's car in the parking lot of a shopping center within the town. And on Christmas Eve, James would also give an interview with the journal, claiming to have briefly spoken with her that morning, and that she called to tell him that she was all doing fine and not to worry about her, and also to say hello to their dogs on her behalf. But when he asked her about her whereabouts, she abruptly hung up on him. James also said this, and I quote, "There is no reason to assume she's dead or alive, joined a group or run off with some other man. There are 1,000 possibilities. The pain is not knowing." James believed she had either run away to join a religious cult or possibly ended her own life over the grief and depression due to their dead son. James would also tell the neighbors and all who knew her that she had left him when they would ask him about her whereabouts after she hadn't been seen in days. An intensive investigation was carried out by the police units. They searched all major roads in the town, including water bodies and within the woods, using the foot, search dogs and helicopters to try to find her. But even with all the efforts, which persisted for some couple of months, she was never located. The police would also walk around James Nichols' home, which they also found to be very untidy and stacked up with hoarded household properties and junks, which were meant to be trashed out. They also passed the basement where James stored his guns in a safe in hopes to find any lead with the missing person case, but their efforts turned out not to be fruitful. The entire search for Joan would eventually be called off as the police found no obvious sign of foul play, but the missing person report would remain open and her sudden disappearance would remain a mystery from 1985 till 2012. And to keep her case from being alive, her case would be reviewed on an annual basis by the police department. However, the unsolved mysterious disappearance of a 55-year-old Joan Nichols, which had kept most people wondering what happened, would finally be brought to light on what might have eventually happened. And this was because in 2013, a grisly discovery, which was possibly overlooked during the police search and investigation, would be made, and which over the years have been hiding in plain sight.
James Nichols reported his wife missing December 21st, 1985. Despite an extensive police investigation, she was never found, and the case remains open. Check back with the Poughkeepsie Journal for more on this developing story.
Back in 1985, after his wife's sudden disappearance, as time went by, James Nichols completely withdrew from the neighbors and went into his shell, while his garage bins grew higher and piled up inside his garage. On the 27th of December 2012, which was 27 years after Joan's sudden disappearance, an 82-year-old James, who was now retired and was still living in his home in the town of Poughkeepsie, New York, was living alone and was not seen for about a week by his neighbors. The neighbors would call the authorities for a welfare check. When authorities arrived, they went inside the home, where they found James slumped in a chair inside his home and appeared unresponsive. They moved closer and examined his pulse, where it was confirmed that he was dead. He died surrounded by stacks of garbage and hoarded materials which occupied his home. The emergency services would be called to collect his body, and a medical examination and postmortem carried out after his death has been discovered. It was determined that he died of natural causes, and after his death, no one from his extended family would claim his body or take control of the estate where he lived. James had died as a loner and someone who most people would describe as being antisocial. James was buried by the Dutchess County Department of Community and Family Services in an unknown location after two of his family members were located by the authorities and told about his death. although they were not able to claim his body. Few months later, after James had passed away, their home would be sold by the real estate, and the buyers of the home would hire a contractor to clean out the house of all dirt, garbage materials, and to also make essential repairs before they could move into the home. On the appointed day, the hired contractor would come to the house to do his job, and while at his job inside the basement, they discovered a large plastic bin behind a false wall. They dragged out this bin and went ahead to open it. Within the bin, they found an object which was bound with rope inside a plastic bag. They uncovered it, and the object they found would reveal something disturbing. The object was a human skeleton. The skeleton had both hands tied with rope, and to make matters more shocking, a large area of the right side of the skull was also found to be missing. The contractors would contact the police, who reached out to the members of the medical examiner's office in Poughkeepsie, and the skeletonized body was removed after it was found. Medical examination would be conducted by the Dutchess County Medical Examiner, and through dental records, they were able to identify that it was the body, or rather the skeleton of John Nichols, who had been declared missing for almost 28 years. An autopsy was carried out to determine the cause of death, and results did reveal that the cause of death was as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. After this chilling discovery had been made, the town of Poughkeepsie Police Department said that the case has not been closed and that they will continue to examine the new forensic evidence. And although James Nichols was now dead, that it was safe to say he was now a suspect in this case. Now, you might ask why the body was not discovered earlier on in the 1970s, when the police walked around in the home, including that particular basement where it was found. Another female detective would say that the body, being held within a plastic bin and within various layers of sheets inside a plastic bag, which was placed behind a false wall, might have been enough to mask the smell of the decomposing flesh. A retired Poughkeepsie detective who led the initial investigation during the early disappearance also said that there were no doubts in his mind that James knew where his wife was, as he saw James as someone who was cold. Not just cold, but seriously cold, and that why the police always suspected that James had a hand in her wife's disappearance, there was no evidence to support these suspicions. But despite their suspicions that Joan was murdered, police were not able to get a warrant which would enable them search the home. And during that time, investigators would continue to closely follow James, only to find out that within a few weeks of the sudden and strange disappearance of his wife, that he already got himself a new girlfriend. And when he was approached with the pictures of him together with the new woman, James would tell them he was getting a lawyer and refused to answer more questions. Neighbors would also begin to open up about what they thought of James. A former neighbor by the name of Denise Dara also said that there were nights when James Nichols introduced himself to his new neighbors on Vassar Road by walking into their front door without knocking. There was also this afternoon whereby Denise Dara asked him to help her with an injured squirrel, and James, who was still wearing his suit jacket, killed it with a hatchet as the children playing in her yard screamed as he did that. Another particular day, she was painting the house wearing cut-off shorts and turned around to kind of look around the property, only to see him taking photos of her from below with a long camera lens.
Vassar Road.
The town of Poughkeepsie is really kind of a small kind of town. It's not really like the city. We don't get that kind of stuff around here, so it's a little shocking.
The town of Poughkeepsie police have been looking for missing elementary school teacher Joanne Nichols since her husband, James Nichols, reported her missing in 1985. He died last December of natural causes at the age of 82. Police say the remains, located in a sealed container behind a false wall in the basement, appear to have been there for years. Neighbors have their suspicions.
I heard about the case on Unsolved Mystery, how his wife went missing after a little while, and now that they found the remains, it's kind of not a coincidence, but it kind of is that they found remains in the house.
It's really weird, it really is.
They probably didn't look in all the right areas. They just looked probably around the house and didn't really check walls.
She probably was around there somewhere. I always said it.
On few occasions when Mr. Nichols came out from his home, he was sometimes found sitting in his car in the driveway, drowsing or reading the paper, or maybe doing nothing at all. Some would also say that James Nicol was an odd man and quite a loner. He lived in solitary for the remaining part of his life until he was found dead. It was later revealed that only to a next-door neighbor and close co-workers did Joan hint that her husband's odd habits did bother her too. She had told a fellow teacher at her school where she thought that she disliked the manner in which her husband did clutter the house with garbage, and also revealed her husband had kept their dead cats frozen in their refrigerator, and how she was always dreaded opening the refrigerator to cook. She also complained of having to hand her paycheck over to him each week. Not just that, when their only son and child had drowned and died in 1982, she did grieve as a normal parent who lost a child would do. But over the following years, it was said she was possibly not depressed as James had claimed. Neither did she run away or leave him or even left a note or called like he told the neighbors and the police during the earlier investigation that started in 1985. None of that was true. This was because Ms. Dara, the neighbor, would later reveal that she was upset that her husband had parked the same amphi car that led to his son's death in the driveway of their home, and this car was a daily reminder of her grief. This sequence of events might have also possibly triggered James to kill his wife. People who knew her knew she tolerated it because she possibly couldn't summon the courage to tell him to knock it off or she was going to leave the marriage. Also, to her family, she was the type who never complained. She was of the old school who believes that when you are married for good. Joan was someone who could let go, but James was someone who most people would describe as a chronic hoarder. And when Joan couldn't stand her husband's odd behavior, an argument possibly occurred, and this argument could have led James to kill her. But even 2 weeks after the body of Mrs. Nichols was found, it was hard on the neighbors and people who knew her to even comprehend the idea that James Nicol, along with his bunch of hoarded tools and his trash stacked in their house, had also been hoarding his wife in the same house all these years. Also, it would be revealed that the day she went missing, detectives didn't see her car in their home, but the day after she was reported missing, detectives saw her car parked in a house driveway, only for Mr. Nichols to say he had found it in a nearby shopping center and even had the car cleaned and vacuumed. Joan's brother, by the name of John Miller, would also hire a private detective who would eventually cost the middle-class family around nearly $150,000 in cash as of that time. The detectives would also reveal that in their course of investigation had met 3 men whom did reveal that James had approached them to kill his wife in a staged home invasion. But the most shocking was that even with all this evidence pointing to James as having something to do with the death of his wife, nothing came of it. A neighbor would also say, and I quote, "It's a shock that it actually did happen, but I think deep down we all knew that something like this would eventually happen. I've lived there for 27 years, so everybody kind of felt the same way." According to the neighbors, James Nichols was a man of mystery and few words. He was always strange. He kept to himself. He really didn't say much to anybody. Another neighbor added. More of them would also say how upset they were that he did get away with this evil secret all this while. And as Joan's father, Mr. Miller, would say, maybe this isn't a Christian thing to say, but I do get satisfaction out of the fact that he died alone and surrounded by nothing but junk. It sounds like he was right where he should have been, miserable and living in filth. There was no reason for him to die alone. He did it all to himself. Even with how gruesome and disturbing this story was, I do feel like at last the discovery ended the mystery and hope it brings some sort of closure to those who knew Joan and also her closer relatives while keeping her memory alive. And that's gonna do it. If you do like true stories like this, subscribe for more videos and take the like button on a ride of a lifetime and turn on all post notifications to our channel. Until next time, see ya.